But then once you're in the education system, you realize that you're just a little cog trying to get children to pass tests. And don't get me wrong, I was pretty good at it and surrounded myself with good teachers and good school leaders. And we got children through Key Stage 2 SATs. But I didn't want to look back on life and think that's all I've ever done. And that's why I decided to create Tagtiv8.
From Coordinate Sport, it's The Drive Phase, a show about sports founders, leaders and experts and the stories behind their business journeys. Our guest on this episode is Bryn Llewellyn, founder of Tagtiv8 and Move and Learn CIC. Following a successful career in primary teaching and leadership, Bryn had a light bulb moment, which led him to create his pioneering approach to physically active learning. We hear a different perspective this week. Bryn expands on his journey from leaving teaching and then launching Tagtiv8. Evidencing the impact of his programs underpins his approach to curriculum development. This has led to consulting engagements with the likes of the BBC, Super Movers programme, and major research projects with UK academics, and even a TED Talk. We dig into all of it in this episode. Enjoy the show. Really excited to welcome Bryn Llewellyn to our podcast for this week's episode, and he's going to tell us all about his company Tagtiv8 and also insights into his journey in the industry and how he's come to be, I guess, one of the influences around child development, curriculum development. So really pleased to have you on the show today, Bryn.
Likewise, I know you're just like east of me, a fair few miles, and normally we'd be meeting over a coffee, but maybe we can save that for 2021, yeah?
Exactly. I think we're maybe in the same tier level at this point, but we'll see what happens. See what happens in a few weeks. What we tend to do when we get started is just look at trying to get to know you a little bit better. So looking at kind of how you were raised, really. So born and raised, I've got West Yorkshire, so Wakefield initially. Is that right?
No, I've landed in Wakefield, West Yorkshire.
Right. Sorry.
Initially born and bred and raised on Tyneside, so South Shields.
South Shields, right.
Not that you can guess from the accent. So I was born, raised there, and then became a teacher, worked in Bradford, West Yorkshire. And it was a case of when I was talking to the children say, "What was that, sir? What?" So I realised that the Geordie accent didn't transpose itself to West Yorkshire. So the accent kind of like disappeared slightly. Then I moved to London and now back in West Yorkshire in Wakefield.
In terms of, I guess, your school, if you go cast your mind back to that, what would you describe your childhood and your school life like?
It's kind of weird. I wouldn't say I was the best of learners in terms of why did I go to school? Well, the main reason was to hang around with my mates and play football at playtime. And I was just like one of those kids who like maybe just quietly got on with things, but I didn't really engage with the learning in the way that I could have and should have. And I think in those days, it was a case of like, sit down, shut up, listen, look at the board at front and just absorb. And I must admit, sometimes I'd be one of those kids who'd be looking out the window.
Your experience of I guess PE and school sport at that time, what was that? Or did you have any memories of how PE was then, and if it engaged you at that time?
Yeah, I remember things like cross-country running. In terms of like the PE staff would just crash out on the crash mats and let the kids go running up into the hills. And they used to take bets on who was going to be the first one back, who was going to be the second one back, who was going to be the last one back, etc. It was kind of free for all, even during the summer season. If you didn't want to play cricket or tennis, you could just go and play football. So it was very lax and very laid back, not what it's like nowadays at all.
Do you think that suited you as a child?
Yeah, I was massively into football. So if I could play football during the summer season, that was great for me. But ultimately, I don't think there was much in the way of development for athletics or other subjects or other sports. Yeah.
So in terms of, like you said, you went into teaching and obviously entrepreneur now. What was kind of your influence? Anything that influenced you to go into teaching at that point?
Oh yeah, I mean, I must admit, I was a bit of a tree hugger. I was left of centre, and my politics were always green rather than red. So I was like the chair of the local Friends of the Earth group, keen campaigner for Greenpeace, any environmental action groups going. I then did a degree in environmental studies. So it was very much a case of I just naively, innocently wanted to save the world. And then you realize that you can't do it on your own. So I thought I'm going to have to try to do this through, look at the words of Nelson Mandela in terms of education. That's the one way to change the world. So I decided I would become a primary teacher with a concentration on environmental education. So education about the environment, through the environment, but ultimately for the environment. And that was why I got into teaching in the first place. But then when you get into the first school, which is the way I first started my teaching, and then into primary schools, you realized it was a case of, okay, we have to do things like English and mathematics. And then we have to do things that are all based around testing. So, as I say, naive outlook was, let's change the world. But then once you're in the education system, you realize that you're just a little cog trying to get children to pass tests. And don't get me wrong, I was pretty good at it and surrounded myself with good teachers and good school leaders. And we got children through Key Stage 2 SATs. But I didn't want to look back on life and think that's all I've ever done. And that's why I decided to create Tagtiv8.
So I guess that I know you mentioned there about the paperwork side of things, the administration, and I know a lot of teachers have that burden of teaching to the test and things like that. Is that one of the things that obviously kind of pushed you out into consultancy initially, or?
As a male in a primary school, you become the PE lead by default. And then you become the deputy head teacher, then the acting head teacher. Then you realize that you're not exactly enjoying it because as an acting head teacher, there was no classroom connection. So I went back to becoming a deputy head teacher, but ultimately it was a case of getting kids to pass SATs. And it was, they were the pressures that we were under through Ofsted and DFE. And I didn't want to look back on my life and think that's all I've ever done. Most schools, children have a sole diet of English and mathematics because they're the subjects that are being tested. And when I was a deputy head teacher in my last school, we had this pot of money for creative partnerships. So we brought artists, dramatists, musicians, filmmakers in. And it was brilliant because these children and their families were like, whoa, you can get a job in the creative industry. And their aspirations just changed. But once that funding was clawed back by the government or pulled back by the government, it was a case of, I need to find something that I really enjoy. And that's where the Tagtiv8 program came in. So when I was teaching in Bradford Bulls were in the ascendancy. This is showing how far back it is.
It's a while back now, yeah.
They had their tag rugby scheme. And I always thought tag rugby meets Scrabble, tag rugby meets Countdown. Could that be? And it was always put on the back burner. But then when I left teaching full time in 2011, 2012, I just thought, let's explore this possibility. Looked at the intellectual property. Nobody had ever done anything like this before. So I decided, let's play with it. Trialed the games out with some children in Bradford, some year 7 children. And I thought it was great. They didn't. And they kind of they didn't annihilate it, but they certainly helped steer the program to where it is now. We took on board their constructive criticism, their feedback, and without their initial input and the input from the teachers, Tagtiv8 wouldn't be where it is now.
Yeah, because I know initially, I don't know if this is the Tagtiv8 program. I remember just on some of our research, it said that some of the feedback initially was the games were a little bit like drinking games. Some of the teachers might have been.
That from the students.
Oh, not from the students. No. Yeah, sorry, from the teachers, obviously.
One of the first schools to come on board with the Tagtiv8 program was down in London, and the deputy head teacher phoned me and said the kids are loving it. And she said, we've got a great quote for the website. And it was, whoever created Tagtiv8 is a genius. So I thought, I'm having that.
Yeah,
but then
definitely.
she spoiled it by continuing the conversation by saying that a lot of the games in the resources pack just seem to resemble drinking games from university. Needless to say, some of the ideas like FizzBuzz, we did take on board those sort of games. And yeah, we don't have tequila in the resources section anymore.
I want to really dive into how Tagtiv8 started in the full model. But just before we do that, you mentioned then around the schools kind of focus on maths and English. And I know our listeners and their leading companies where they have programs that are fantastic programs and they really struggle to get them into schools, especially in the morning time. So like schools always have that focus on maths and obviously numeracy, literacy in the morning. I just wondered what your take on is in terms of physical activity. in the morning. I mean, the impact of it, and whether you push for that with Tagtiv8 and in the schools, or just kind of whenever it needs to be delivered.
Yeah, I mean, like historically, we do English and maths in the morning and the other subjects in the afternoon, except for the poor kids who don't grasp it in the morning. Then they get
Yeah.
an intervention program in the afternoon. So there's a lot of kids who don't get access to PE and sport and the arts because the focus is on English and maths only. I mean, when I was a deputy head teacher and a teacher, I used to love taking the children into the sports hall and do PE first thing in the morning, because this was a way of engaging the children straight away. But you're right, in terms of, I do think Tagtiv8 is one of its USPs is that it addresses English and maths, those core subjects, through physical activity. And this is a bit of a USP for Tagtiv8 in terms of it blends those subjects with physical activity, and it can be done in the morning as well as the afternoon. And again, it is one of those things. And I did talk about intervention programs. Tagtiv8 was there, and I always liken the tags to like the building blocks and Lego. And in terms of that creativity and flexibility, so I wanted to devise a program that went from early years into year 1, year 2, year 3, all the way up to year 6 and beyond. That would work for a class of 30, and also an intervention group for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kids who've not grasped it in the main lesson. So yeah, it's a unique blend, but it works as well as it plays.
Yeah, definitely. I always think about myself and my routine. Like, I always feel better doing a bit of physical activity first thing in the morning, kind of setting the day up. So I always think that'd be good for schools to maybe embrace it a little bit more if they could. Or they've got a busy schedule every day.
Yeah, and yourself, if you're sat down, the quick fix is to reach for the cup of coffee or maybe the glass of water. And that's the default setting. But I've found, like during lockdown 1 in particular, I would have the water away from the desk. So I have to physically stand up and go and get the water. And likewise, if the clock hits like 4 or 8 or 12, I'll stand up and walk around. Or, when the clock hits the hour, I'll stand up and dance around the room for a little bit, purely because a little mini hit session for like a Tabata session, that's worth its weight in gold to like recharge. And if it works for me as an older adult, just think about the benefits to a child who sat down in front of the whiteboard looking out the window. Yeah. We need to think in terms of like, how do we change these behaviors? If you look at like the concentration span of a child, it's not 45 minutes, it's not an hour, which is how long most lessons last. It's a case of, let's think about ways that we can bring about behavioral change with little things like standing up and moving around.
Yeah, definitely agree. It's almost like it just kind of creates energy. Doing that, being active actually creates that energy for you, so a bit more focus. Fast forward, so you left teaching 2010, 2011. So 2012 was kind of your first year for Tagtiv8. I guess what was that journey like? Obviously, you created the program, did a bit of market research with the school in Bradford.
Yeah.
How did you take it from there to, I guess, go to market, if you like?
I was playing around with it in the early days. It was just purely playfulness. There was nothing in terms of, my background was teaching and school leadership, so no business acumen whatsoever. No, not even looking at YouTube videos. It was a case of build it and they will come. And it's a case of they've come very, very slowly. But in terms of, I was writing curriculum material for other people, and I took it to one organization and says, this is my idea. Do you think it'll work? And they went, no. So I said, right, if you don't want it, I'll just run with it myself. So that work for other people, that consultancy for other people, that's diminished as the Tagtiv8 programs come on board. So 2012, the idea, 2013 registered as a limited company, and probably didn't really start pushing it as a business properly until 2015, 16.
In terms of the model, so you've got just for the listeners, you've got the resources, you've created that. What's the kind of the go-to-market? So is that being provided to schools? Is the training package in it? Do you want to kind of lay that out for us in terms of how it works?
So how do you get people to realize how good it is? You have to see it in action to purely get it, so that you see the impact on the children and realize how easy it is to run. So quite often I'll do an activity day and follow it by a training session. So it's a bit of a sample session for the teachers to see the impact and also how easy it is to run. So if I'm doing an activity session, the teacher will often say to me, God, this is so easy. I wish I'd thought of it, which is kind of like a bit of a compliment there. So we do activity days. The savvy schools then go, okay, then we'll sit the children down. We'll have a word with the school council and we'll say, you've had a look at the game, you've played the game. Do you think we should invest our PE sport premium funding in it? And if the kids stand up and say yes, the savvy school leaders put that on their website and say, we use pupil voice to determine how to spend school premium funding or another form of funding. So some schools do it online, some people do an activity day, some people buy the resources, the planning documents, they have the training face-to-face or online nowadays. So there's no one route to market. It's whatever fits the needs of the school at that particular time.
Just for listeners who haven't come across Tagtiv8 at all, I mean, I've seen you at many events and kind of conferences. You get around a lot to a lot of those conferences, school conferences and PE conferences. But in terms of the actual game and the concept, we talked about tag rugby, so the tag belts. Can you just outline what that is and how it looks in terms of the concept?
Yeah, I always thought it was tag rugby meets Scrabble or tag rugby meets Countdown. But then you realise that tag rugby turns certain people off. And you look back to what's the ultimate playground game, and it's TIG or tag, wherever you live in the world. And so I was selling it in terms of TIG or tag rugby meets Scrabble meets Countdown, etc. So the idea is the children move around in different ways. So it could be like tag rugby when they're grabbing the tag of each other, running back, put the tag in the bucket. Or it could be doing relay races, moving in different ways, collecting tags. So it's very much a physical challenge followed by a thinking challenge. So no matter which way it runs, the children have collected tags. So the number version, all of the red tags are the even numbers, the yellow tags are the odd numbers, and the blue tags are the operations, including brackets, more than, less than symbols. The letter version is consonants one colour, vowels the next colour, and the third colour is the digraphs, trigraphs, and prefixes and suffixes. So the children can quickly see patterns with the colours. So you've grabbed the tags, you've collected the tags, then you give them a thinking challenge, and the thinking challenge could be as simple as ordering the numbers smallest to largest, finding combinations of numbers that make a number bond of X, Y, Z, finding multiples of X, Y, Z, square numbers, prime numbers, algebra. And then when you come to the phonics, it could be about CVC words, it could be about prefixes, suffixes. Because my background's teaching, I can see it being applied to anything, whether or not it's English, maths, and now we've got the program linking to French and German, other languages, history, geography, science, even RE. All those subjects can be activated by these little building blocks, the Lego building blocks, the tags, which are different colours.
Yeah, so it's almost that platform's letting you go across all the curriculum. One question I've got, because it sounded, in terms of the range there you've explained, I guess what's the most advanced level you can get to? Some of that I might need to refresh myself on the algebra side. But what type of age do you go to? Is it key stage 1 and 2, or do you go 3? How old do you go with it?
Yeah, so it goes right the way from early years, right there up into key stage 2. So at the end of year 6, but this term I've been working with some students, some year 7 students in Liverpool. So their PE lead, he brought me in to work with 27 children for 5 hours. I thought, God, this is going to be a tough task, but the kids just saw it and got it and grabbed it and ran with it. And then I did a training session with the PE department and the maths department, and they could just see it as the ideal blend. So now they've got the resources and they're going to run it for year 7 and year 8 as intervention programs. So these kids get a weekly physically active learning session in mathematics. And as I say, you can do square numbers, prime numbers, algebraic equations. It is that flexible.
So definitely some of the key stage 3 curriculum then getting covered.
Yeah.
Got the concept. In terms of how you kind of roll that out, I know you're working with I think it's over 300-400 schools at the moment. So you'd go into the school, deliver the intervention, obviously, to get the buy-in, but then you're providing CPD, I guess, for teachers so they can then use it to sort of spread it far and wide without you having to clock up the miles every day, kind of go up and down the country.
Yeah. I mean, pre-COVID-19, I was doing maybe 2-3 schools a week. And then obviously lockdown 1 hit us hard, but it gave us time to develop new games and new ideas. So for example, somebody suggested tying the belts not around the middles of the children, but around the trees. So we developed this tree tag concept. So it's just like orienteering using the tags. And again, coming back to the question, is in terms of my mission is to train the teachers, to empower the teachers so that they can take that learning beyond the classroom walls, whether or not it's into the hall or the playground or the school fields or the school forest, wherever. And I've realized now that sometimes if I'm trying to address all teachers at the same time, it's not working. So you've got to look at targeted key members of staff in each school, and they become the move and learn champions, the Tagtiv8 champions, and it's up to them to like support their colleagues on a journey. So, for example, we've got a system in place at the moment with Academy St. James in Bradford, the most amazing school, and I'm working with year 2 and year 5, and every Friday, the year 5 teacher will take those kids out in sunshine, wind, rain, or as it happened last week, in the snow, doing active geometry. And it's a case of like giving them a little bit of hand holding and drip feeding the planning documents to them rather than give them everything. It's a case of like asking them what they need, what do they want, because you can provide a program or a platform, but ultimately there's no one teacher the same as another, and it has to be done with tact, diplomacy, and yeah, you've got to listen to them, empathize, because teachers have got to deal with an incredible amount of pressure.
Yeah, definitely. And well, you've got to cover all the subjects as well at the same time. It's like, I mean, we get to enjoy just talking about sport and PE and stuff. You've got to cover everything, even the ones you don't like. So, as the program's been running, what's been your biggest impact or the biggest achievement you feel like you've had so far?
Working with children and teachers, the anecdotes come thick and fast, and the smiles do as well. So, a comment such as, I never knew he could do that. He's never written that in his maths book, or he's never put his hand up in the maths lesson. That's a great quote from a teacher. And likewise, a child from Leicester, Ethan, year 5. And at the end of this session, he came up with sweat on his brow, big smile on his face. And he just said, you know what? I thought I was rubbish at maths, but now I know I'm not. And it's that transformational moment when this kid, this child, this learner realizes that he can do something. But obviously the smiles and the anecdotes need to be backed up by evidence. So we went to Dr. Andy Daly-Smith at Leeds Beckett University. His first round of research had a demonstrated impact on cognition in terms of speed and fluency in maths. And it was those children who were deemed the less academic, they were the ones that had the greatest impact. And as well as that, we drilled down a little bit further, and the concentration levels, those children who took part in the physical active learning session, their concentration levels were better for the subsequent session. So that first part of research was brilliant. And then Dr. Andy Daly-Smith and I did a TEDx talk. So we shared the initial findings at a TEDx talk, which was brilliant. This then opened up the doors to bring in further funding. So not Leeds Beckett, but Leeds University and the School of Psychology. They've got funding to work with more schools over a longer period of time to demonstrate impact, as in a more sustainable impact. So I think that initial impact was proven, but we need to prove it over a longer period of time with more children.
Especially with the PE premium, talk about is evidencing where it's where it's being spent and what's the biggest impact, and maybe what version 2 or 3 will look like down the line, where we can maybe put the funding into places that are really sustainable. So like you said, if your model of training up the teachers and letting them spread it far and wide, backed up by the data and the research you're doing.
So, for example, working with a school in Leeds, and we did a physically active learning session, and it was such a simple activity. So the children are running around with the tags on the belt. I shout out a number, and they have to get together in pairs. And the teacher looked at me and said, "This is brilliant. I'm going to try this in my classroom." I went, "Okay, then what are you going to do?" She says, "Well, I'm going to print some numbers off, and then I'm going to photocopy them. Then I'm going to laminate them." And I just looked at it and I went, "Well, why not just take the tags into the classroom?" And she smiled at me and then realized, in terms of teachers have this default setting that you've got to press a button, download, print, photocopy, laminate, and or stick stuff in books. And I think it's a case of like the Tagtiv8 program is something that you don't need. It will save teachers time. And that's what teachers are so short of. They're lacking in time. And I think teachers, once they get to grips with the program, they go, "Oh, I can just get out the tags to do this part of the curriculum. I can get out the tags to do that part of the curriculum."
Because it's a different experience for the children as well. I think you probably just in terms of like memories, if I can remember lessons at school now because they were different from sitting behind the desk like every other lesson, because I've got out and I've learned, they're probably more likely to remember that topic or that subject they were covering and using a different method like the tag. So that was great. I'm just going back now because we actually spoke back during the first lockdown. We had a call then, I remember, and you were really, really busy at the time. I remember speaking to you, and you're busy creating resources for the BBC at that time. And I just wanted to touch on it because I know it's I'm sure they're a free. Is it free resource? Just in terms of pointing people in that direction, and maybe if you let us know what you're doing for the BBC, because it's a big deal. If you can you just give us a bit of info on that one?
God, blast from the past there. Yeah. Yeah. So like lockdown one, all those school bookings were lost. So I thought, what on earth am I going to do? And luckily, because I'd done some work with the BBC before for super movers and live lessons, they came to me and said, look, we want a hand with some script writing and content creation for the maths. Will you do it? And I says, yeah, of course I'll do it. So every day I was sat at the MacBook and part of a team, albeit for a temporary basis of 3-4 months, churning out content and scripts. And yeah, it was great to see it online. And the BBC really thought this through in terms of children who don't have access to Wi-Fi. It was all put on the iPlayer and the red button system. So if you didn't have Wi-Fi, you could still access these sessions as well.
And just touching on the lockdown, obviously children's, I guess, physical activity levels. We've been speaking about this recently. Coming out of that now, we've got a big challenge to try and get people get the kids active again and kind of undo all the non-activity or inactivity that's been going on. So, what's your take on, I guess, the issue of childhood obesity? I don't know if you've got, hopefully you have got one, but what do you think? How we can tackle that, or what do you think is the main thing for us to be looking at?
I'll talk about levels of physical inactivity first. So if you look at like the data, if children up to the age of 7 probably get the requisite amount of physical activity per day, I'm not saying all children, but the majority do. And then it's age 7 that level of physical activity starts to decline. And one teacher in Bradford said, it's down to phonics screening. It's down to key stage 1 SATs. And I went, it might have something to do with that. But I think that's when the children start their addiction to digital devices, whether or not it's tablets or phones or PCs or whatever. And I think that's when we need to start looking in terms of those levels of physical inactivity. And if you look at like the obesity levels, so obesity levels, we've got children becoming obese earlier, staying obese for longer. And then if you look at the rates of deprivation and how they link to obesity levels, it's scary. So like in the Tudor times, it'd be the rich that were large and the poor that were skinny. And that's flipped on its head completely. So prior to, actually it was during Rugby World Cup. So I was working 2 days with a school in Harrow in North London. And then it was a 6-hour journey up to Workington. So these kids in Harrow, affluent part of London, they rack up for the Tagtiv8 sessions in their hoodies and their sweatshirts with the tennis club badge, the rugby club badge, the football club, the athletic club. And the kids are lithe and they're running around really into it. Whereas the kids in Workington, I'm having to get the adult Velcro belts on some of them in year 4. And it was just that direct comparison between the rich and the poor, the haves and the have-nots. And I wrote a little blog post about this on the back of the Ofsted findings from October. And somebody said to me, like, yeah, during lockdown 1, the fat became fatter and the fit became fitter. And I know it's very crude to say that, but it's kind of true. You know, those kids who were access to the gardens, they were doing doing the bouncing and the speed jumps over the rolled up socks, etc. But for every child who was doing that, there was 1 or 2 children who weren't doing anything. And, Joe Wicks, bless him, he managed to get quite a lot of kids and families active and off their backsides and off their sofas. And I know he came in for a lot of criticism. He's not the nation's PE teacher. It was a series of high intensity interval training sessions, but at least he talked about it in terms of the emotional context and the nutrition context as well. So, yes, he came in for a lot of criticism and he made a lot of money on the back of it, but he did actually start to change behaviors. So I'll tip my hat to him there.
Yeah, definitely. I think like just touching on that for sure. That I guess in the more deprived areas, that access to even just to the garden is a big issue. Like you can obviously during lockdown it is one, but also just children's activities in general. They don't have the kind of the old school, like I guess we did, where we could just go out and play in the street as much as before. A lot of areas where there's no ball games, etc. So it's that lifestyle component, and if everything's a formal, organized club scenario to be active, then yeah, it's always going to hit the more deprived harder. But in terms of your business, your day to day, moving on to running Tagtiv8, what are the kind of your more recurring challenges that you get day in day out? I know travel or lockdown's a massive one, but I mean just in general, and maybe not COVID related, but yeah, how's it been growing a business, and what's your biggest and most recurring challenges?
Obviously, we have to convince teachers and school leaders that there are benefits to physically active learning.
Do you think that's more difficult now? Do you think that's getting easier with that? Obviously, we hear about it all the time, or is that just
I think there's more people aware of it now than ever before looking at social media. And I know the work of Dr. Andy Daly-Smith and other organisations partners with the Creating Active Schools framework. I think there's more people buying into that process now than ever before. I am concerned by I know Boris Johnson keeps on talking about, levelling things up. I would still harken back to the lack of a level playing field. So 3 years ago, I was invited down to DFE to talk about Tagtiv8 and that initial round of research. And the guys at DFE said they really got it, but they couldn't share it and celebrate it because everything had to go through either AFP, Sport England, or Youth Sport Trust.
right?
And even though they got it and they could understand it, they couldn't talk about it and celebrate it and share it. Everything has to go through them. But ultimately, they've got their own products that they have to cascade out. So I know that Youth Sport Trust, through their school games organisers, they've got a massive outreach. But ultimately, they're just sharing their own preferred platforms and programs and products.
Yeah.
So I would say, yeah, that's a major challenge. So if schools have got a certain amount of budget and they've already spent it on another product or platform, Tagtiv8 won't get a look in, even though the two programs are completely different.
Especially there with the influence as well. So if you've got influence from Youth Sport Trust or from the local school games, I'm assuming those programs are going to be more of a higher priority, or get more. The awareness of those in the schools is going to be high. It's going to be more of a challenge for you to get that reach with your marketing efforts. I guess the answer would probably be COVID-19, but I was going to ask you, what's your biggest, if you had the biggest setback you've had there so far in business that you've had to overcome?
As I say, there's been no backing from DFE, no backing from Sport England, no backing from YST. Everything has been investment of my own savings. Everything's been grown organically. And again, if you run your own business, cash flow is a massive, massive issue. So, for example, I want to do this, this, and this, but there's no money to actually pay somebody to do the website, say, or to do that sort of like boarding process in the way that it needs to be done in the sharing of the planning documents. So it's I think cash flow is a major problem. As a teacher, as a school leader, you don't have to worry about that necessarily.
Yeah.
You have a salary coming in. When you've got a mortgage to pay and bills to pay, everything revolves around cash flow, I suppose.
I'm sure that'll definitely resonate with all our listeners who are running businesses themselves. Obviously, on the show, and coming from our background, we want to speak to coaching providers, but we look at digital transformation and how you use data and systems and IT in your business. So I know you've done a lot of research and connected with big institutions. Or what's kind of your view of the systems and products in the business?
The Tagtiv8 resource is very much hands-on. It's physical, it's analog. But in terms of outreach to schools, the amount of bookings that I get from schools based on Twitter, and it's about people saying nice things about you on Twitter and or Facebook, that's where the bookings come in. So I'm reliant upon social media. In terms of the way the planning documents are created, I always use Google Docs, Google Slides, Google Drive. And the way that I've done that is purely a bit of intellectual property in terms of everything on Google Drive is date stamped.
Right.
So if somebody was to come in and say, we've done this, and it looks remarkably like I've been doing, I can say, well, actually, it's date stamped on Google.
Yeah, you've got all the Virgin history and everything. Yeah, you can go back.
It's the collaborativeness as well. So the latest Tagtiv8 resources, the planning documents for history and geography, and hopefully RE and science. There's an English advisor, Philip Webb, based up in North Yorkshire. So he's putting stuff on to the Google Doc I'm putting stuff, we're editing it together. And I think that's the way forward in terms of that collaborative approach, using technology to connect. So we're not driving upwards to North Yorkshire, no matter how gorgeous it is around Skipton, but we can do stuff remotely and create something that's going to be wonderful for the teachers and ultimately benefit the children.
Definitely, and you got, like I said, we're a massive advocate for cloud-based computing. So yeah, all the benefits there. Just one question on the industry. I know obviously you come at it from a different angle, obviously coming through teaching, so it'd be good to get your insight on it. But in terms of how you feel it's changed, 'cause I'm assuming back when you were a teacher, I don't know if you did, but you might have engaged companies, external providers, sports coaching companies into your own school. You might have been on the other end of the kind of the procurement or the commissioning side of things. How do you feel like it's changed from then to now, or
As a deputy head teacher, I was responsible for bringing, like, as you say, not just the artists and the dramatists, musicians in, but the external providers for P and sport. So, Bradford City football in the community, their coaches would be coming in, or we'd have gymnasts coming in, and they'd be working with children, dancers as well. When I was teaching, there was no such thing as P and sport premium funding. And how did we do it? Well, we'd take money out of the school budget. We'd get parents to pay where they could afford it. We would subsidise it for those visitors coming in as well as visits going out of school. I think that P and sport premium funding has been a massive opportunity. And some schools have grabbed it and they've really thought things through, whereas there are other schools who've simply used it to offset other budget cuts. So, typical conversation is, we love what you do, Bryn, but we've got no money in the budget.
yeah,
And I'll say, well, you've got your P and sport premium funding. Yeah, but we're using that to pay Mrs. X. Who's Mrs. X? Oh, she's the higher level teaching assistant. Okay, how's she upskilling the staff? Oh, she's not. But she's running an after school dance club once a week. And then again, the external providers, there are some who are amazing. So the guys from cross-curricular orienteering, Will, got it sussed in terms of, that's a quality program, quality product. Whereas there are still people who will go to the proverbial man in white van with his level 2 qualification. And we know full well there's no upskilling of staff. The staff are elsewhere doing their PPA. So I think some schools have been brilliant and thought strategically about it, whether or not they've trained up their own staff to level 5, level 6. But there's still been millions wasted.
and so in terms of business philosophies, one question we always ask: do you have a way or a system that you do things, or have you got anything that you've kind of created as you've gone along?
Oh my God. I love the work of Sinek.
Yeah, Simon Sinek. Yeah.
Yeah, about playing he calls it the infinite game. I must admit, I'm like a big shout out to Curtis Wilson from Big Maths. And he pushed me in the direction. He's pushed me in lots of directions, actually. And he's challenged my thinking, but like Audible books. So I'm listening to stuff by Simon Sinek and various other people. So it's like Seth Godin, Tribes. Yeah. And then other things in terms of like just learning to manage your expectations. There's a school in Leeds I was working with earlier on this term. And the deputy head teacher said to me, I've been wanting you to work with us ever since I saw you at the Rugby World Cup event. And I went, that was 2015. It's taken you 5 years to get that initial bonus into the school. So yeah, you have to learn to be patient. But in terms of business strategy, I look towards like the Sinex stuff and Carmine. Is it Gallo? Carmine Gallo.
Yeah.
And find the why and telling the story. Talking of stories. I Tagtiv8 is mine. I'm now part of a KIC, a community interest company called Move and Learn. And one of the co-directors and myself is currently writing a book for Crown House Publishing about physically active learning. And we had a meeting with the publisher just yesterday. And he said, what you need to do is to write a book that nobody else can write.
Yeah.
And I think this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to create something that's unique, authentic and honest, which will get buy-in from teachers and school leaders and others, because it's not schools, it's about schools and communities and bringing businesses in, and it's not about competition. And I've mentioned Ryan Ellis already, and he had a gorgeous quote, and the quote was faster alone but further together. And I just wish there were more people out there who would realise that, we should be working more together and collectively and collaboratively.
Definitely. I think that's what we're trying to do, the podcast, bring them stories and everyone hopefully learn from each other. A bit more personal on this one. In terms of your daily routine and your habits, do you have anything that you do every day that keeps you performing at the top level? Or you mentioned about some of the tactics during lockdown, but you have like a routine of things that you do each day?
Well, as I said, when I'm stuck at the MacBook, I'll do mini Tabata sessions to break up the day, which are quite nice. I am 25 minutes cycle away from the Yorkshire Sculpture Park. That's my go-to place. And I've said, like, strap on a podcast, listen to some music. Spotify, whoever invented Spotify, I owe you big time. I'll just plug myself into music, get on my bike, and just head out and just lose myself.
Decompress a bit. No, I love that. Last question for me is, if you were going to go back to, let's say, when you left teaching at that point, started out on your own and launching a business, what piece of information or piece of advice would you go back and tell yourself back then?
One of my biggest regrets, I loved teaching, I loved school leadership, but I wish I'd left earlier so Tagtiv8 would have been further on the journey by now. I also wish when I'd started off with Tagtiv8, I'd had the balls, for want of a better term, to just grab Tagtiv8 completely rather than doing consultancy for others. Don't get me wrong, I brought on a lot of stuff from working with other people, but ultimately I wish I just dived into Tagtiv8 completely, because we would have been so much further on the journey than now. And then the other thing is, one of the reasons I left teaching was I was doing stuff that was against my core values. And I do think, in terms of, there are a lot of teachers out there who are ticking boxes, going through the motions because they have to do it. But ultimately, just, find that job, find that thing in terms of something that works and plays for you. And surround yourself with good people. Surround yourself with good people who are going to provoke you as well as support you.
Fantastic. Really thankful for your time today as well. One of the things I'll probably say we've had the most references, probably because of your teaching background, I guess. We've got loads of external reading to do, so we'll be linking all those in our show notes. So your TEDx talk, all the references to the books and other information points, we'll put them all in the show notes. But in terms of if anyone wants to get involved with Tagtiv8, and I know you were looking at licensing model, etc., what's the best way to get hold of you? And are you still open? Are you still looking for partners, whether they're private companies or obviously schools? What's the best way to kind of reach out and get in touch?
The trainer program was accredited by Ofqual. Not that Ofqual have done themselves any favors during the exams fiasco, but yeah, the trainer program has been approved. So that is ready to roll out. In terms of, I am the bottleneck at the moment, in terms of it's me going to Worcestershire, Teesside, Cumbria, Glasgow, whatever. So the idea is to find the right people, the right organisations with a similar ethos to come on board and, represent and deliver and lead Tagtiv8 in certain geographical regions with my support and the research that's backing it all up. Yeah, Tagtiv8 is ready to roll across the UK through cooperation, collaboration, and working together. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So look at the website. The email address is on there. The Twitter address is on there. Instagram, Facebook. Connect by all means. That's great.
Definitely. So hopefully we've got some high quality companies listening, and they'll be reaching out to become your network of tutors out there.
I'm a man of a certain age now, and it's a case of passing the baton on to younger people who are ideal role models for the children and also for the teachers as well. And then that'll let me do the strategic stuff, the playful stuff, the research.
Yeah, Bryn, thanks so much for your time today. It's been great, and hopefully we'll catch up next time in person.
Take care now.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for listening to this week's show. You can subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can write to us at dryphase.podcast@coordinate.cloud, tweet us at coordinatesport, or follow us on Instagram at coordinate_sports, or on my account at James_ventures. This episode was produced by Nancy Kwamboka, with support from Claire Goodchild and Lola Small, with special thanks to Rochelle. I'm James Moore, and you've been listening to The Drive Phase from Coordinate Sport.